by you, brothers.
Drummer.
Woo. Coming up next on the main stage, we have Kotow from CCA, who's going to come up here and talk about 30 by 30. Everyone needs to come over here and come listen to what he has to say.
We have been fearful, and rightly so, because we are fighting for our access to our coastal waters, guys. But remember, fishermen aren't the enemy. And that's what we're going to talk about right now with Michael Esgro. So Mike, I'm going to give him the mic first, talking about the OPC, Ocean Protection Council policy on 30 by 30 and how we plan to implement that going forward. Michael Esgro, guys.
All right. Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate CCA for inviting me. It's my first time at this event. I wouldn't say anything because I've never been here before. It's really cool. First time back since COVID. That's awesome. And when I look out here, I see families. I see people that have a passion. I feel the same way. I can't claim to be a fisherman. Kind of dabble, but mostly I'm a scuba instructor. That's my passion. That's my connection to the ocean. I had that passion long before I came to OPC. And that's what I see, is that connection, right? So in terms of 30 by 30, OPC is part of the California Natural Resources Agency. And the Resources Agency is responsible for implementing this executive order that was passed in 2020 to conserve 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030. A couple of years later, fast forward in 2022, after a long process that did include some big public engagement, some really big statewide webinars, the Resources Agency put out Pathways to 30 by 30, which does a couple of really important things. So it's a big document. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. At least give it a skim, the sections that have to do with coastal waters. And pay attention to the definition of conservation, right? California, a lot of people all over the world are talking about 30 by 30. California is the first place to have a definition. The definition has two parts. The first is that to count for 30 by 30, an area, whether it's on land or coastal waters, has to be durably protected, right? Which means that it has to have gone through some sort of formal process, regulatory process, and can't just be undone without a process. And then second, there has to be some amount, some level of ecosystem level benefits, right? So two parts to that definition of conservation. Second thing that Pathways does is it basically says, okay, how are we going to get there, both for lands and for coastal waters? I think what you'll see if you look through the document, it's not a top-down authoritative approach. It's not the state drawing lines on a map and saying, people can't go here because we're going to conserve these areas. What it is much more about being more bottom-up, being more grassroots, more about giving the power to local communities to do good conservation work. And I think that, the ocean's a little different, obviously, because it's a public resource. Nobody owns the ocean. But we're trying to take that same approach as OPC. So what are we doing? Okay? We have 4 strategies to achieve 30 by 30 in coastal waters. The first, which I know I think is top of mind for everybody, is marine protected areas. So we know we have this statewide network of marine protected areas. It covers 16% state waters. Includes about 9% of state waters are fully no-take, and then the rest allow some level of fishing, right? And that MPA network is going through its own independent scientific review process right now. And the review and evaluation of MPAs is based on science, right? And not the 30 by 30 policy goal. So I can't lie to you. There may be changes to MPAs if the science justifies those changes. But think about tweaks, scooching a boundary up or down, maybe changing some regulations. Maybe if there was important habitat that was missed, it does need to be protected. Or conversely, maybe if there's area, imagine a state marine reserve that protects the kelp forests, right? Why can't you fish for salmon if it doesn't have any impact on the biodiversity? Those kinds of changes are on the table. But nobody is talking about making up the other 14% by doubling the size of the MPA network. No one at the state level. Because MPAs aren't the only way that we can achieve conservation in the ocean. So, what are the other ways? First, we want to take a really close look at our national marine sanctuaries. National marine sanctuaries, there's 4 of them. There's 3 that have portions in state waters. And those sanctuaries we think could qualify, but we need to take a closer look, more of a scientific evaluation, and especially think about, could they count if we had some strengthened protections in those sanctuaries? We have to work in collaboration with the sanctuaries who don't manage fishing, to say that up front, right? To think about threats to water quality, restoration. Kelp restoration is a big thing that I work on. That's a huge concern in the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. Ship strikes to whales, plastic pollution. We want to take a threat-based approach. So it's about all threats, right? It's not just about fishing. The third way is tribal stewardship. So we have California Native American tribes all up and down the coast. They've expressed a lot of interest in trying to take more of an active role in stewardship of the coast and ocean. So we're looking at ways that we could help tribes establish areas that they are responsible for stewarding, right? We're at the very beginning of that conversation. There's a lot of tribal consultation that needs to happen before we get there, but really focusing in on tribes is our third approach. And then the fourth approach is to look at all those other spatial management measures that aren't MPAs or sanctuaries that are out there in the ocean. So spatial fisheries management measures, like think of a cowcod conservation area. They're called areas of biological significance, water quality protected areas. There's all these different kinds of areas that might be durable, that might provide some level of conservation benefit, but we just need to explore them further, okay? So those are our four approaches. There will be opportunities for public input at each of those four. Think about them as tables, right? Everybody's talking about a seat at the table. There's actually 4 tables. And we want everybody at those 4 tables because it's a kind of an umbrella process, right? So we're going to keep you guys informed about opportunities to get involved. Check out our website, opc.ca/30by30. I know Wayne's got all his materials as well. Hopefully he'll be pointing folks to our website and our fact sheet that we've developed as well. And I just want to close by saying I think there's been a lot of concern among the angling community about what 30 by 30 represents. I understand that people are very concerned. I hope I've been able to mitigate some concerns, and I hope this is just the start of a conversation where fishermen are not the enemy of conservation. And we are taking an approach that's about conservation and not about preservation. There's a really important distinction there. So let's all work together to get good conservation work done. We might not agree on everything. I'm not going to stand here and make you a bunch of promises that I can't keep. But I am going to say that I'm committed to continuing the conversation, which is a long time coming. The state probably should have been here a long time ago, but we're here now. I'm committed to that. I'm committed to answering your questions today. And I think I'll leave it at that and turn it back over to Wayne.
Hey, let's hear it for Michael Esgro for standing up here in front of us, guys. So just so you understand, Coastal Conservation Association of California represents you. We represent your interest in conservation as well as access. We're not the enemy, and we've been saying this forever. We started conservation efforts in the fishing and the hunting community. We paid for it. We have 2.1 million anglers out there. We put $3.4 billion into California's economy towards conservation efforts. We put our time, our money, and our efforts. We do fisheries management. We believe that good fisheries management is the answer to answering the question whether or not there are threats out there that need to be addressed. That's always been our concern. What we have a problem with, or what we say is, we believe in clean water, we believe in good biodiversity, biomass, good ecosystems. But what we all are against are pollution, whether that is sewer runoff, fertilizers, the pesticides, plastics. We are against all of that going and getting, quote, flushed into our inshore waters. All of us should be worried about that. These storms have done nothing but exacerbate that problem. On top of that, we have raw sewage being flushed into our ocean. All of these are threats to all of our California coastline. The one that we still don't understand are Mylar balloons and balloon releases out to our public. We have been talking about this for years, and we do not understand how we can still have that when we know that they have been threats to not only terrestrial but the coastal waters. We are here to fix the real problems that plague our coastline, and if we can get these things fixed, they will go such a long way in correcting all of our coastline. We may not need these MPAs because our fisheries management practices are for protecting biodiversity, biomass, and all of the habitat. Federal and state protections in California are the strictest in probably the nation, if not the world. The redundancy that we have out there between all of our agencies and our practices are well known. You guys know what we go up against all the time. Just read our regulation books. So what we claim is this: we're not the enemy. Our conservation efforts can coexist with conservation and sustainable, responsible outdoor consumptive practices. That's what we've been preaching. That's what we fight for. That's why we have a seat at the table and fight so hard for you, because we understand the need for clean water and biodiversity, but we don't understand why we are the one being threatened for access when there has been no proof of why our fishing practices are detrimental to the resources. That is where the rub has been coming in. And we understand there's needs at times for protection. We take the hits. Look at what we do out here. Look at our groundfish regulation, sheepshead regulation, our cowcod conservation, our rockfish conservation area line. We get it. We put our money where our mouth is, and we take the protection when necessary. We take the hits. But we also want to be rewarded. Look at our cowcod conservation area. It's been closed for 20 years. Cowcod has been being rebuilt 70 years ahead of schedule. We got them to admit that cowcod has been being rebuilt. And at Pacific Fisheries Management Council, we just got recognized working together between the E&GO community, Direct Fish, the commercial, and the department for opening the cowcod conservation area. It just got done at the Pacific Fisheries Management Council in the last session. That's 20 years of closures that we are going to be rewarded. We're talking 5,000 square miles. Was it easy? No. Did we get it all? No. What we agreed to was that there's going to be these 8 pinnacles that we cannot do bottom fishing, ground fishing on. No bottom contact. But we can now fish the pelagics within those zones. So the whole zone is open with a few restrictions. Why? Because we still believe in the conservation efforts. So sponges and corals are still a problem out there, and we want to protect them. We agreed to that. But see where we're coming from? Our position is that we're not the enemy of the conservation effort, and we're hijacking all those things that we've been doing for so many years. We're not the enemy. We just provide, we want access, reasonable access where it's being necessary. If it's not included to us, use the science, use the numbers, and show us why. We're big boys, we understand the numbers, we understand where we need to take the hits. That's our position, and I hope that's very evident. Now, we have been on a campaign, and you guys know what we've been doing out there, representing you and raising the alarm because we understand the threat. In this last month, OPC has come up with position statements and definitions that we've been looking for. We just came back from 3 days of MPA to CAL review meetings with the Fish and Game Commission and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And the answers from the statements that we heard there were very, very encouraging. We didn't know what they were going to do with the MPA and CAL review. They could have said, we're going to go and double it because we're so successful. We didn't know. But what you heard Michael say and I'm going to say is, we heard a positive sign from them that they're going to take an honest review of the current MPA network, and they're going to do adaptive management steps within that network. There's not an appetite that we have heard to increase it or double it in size, which is good, but there could be tweaks. Some of the things we said was, let's fix the whole network, let's fix the whole pollution issue up and down the coast. That's honest, that's fair. But other things we said was, if it is truly a science experiment, as they claim, then those current MPA network up and down the coast, the ones in the southern bight down here, show a big difference between inside and outside the MPA, right? Biomass and the spillover effect and everything like that. We've heard it, we see it, We're not going to argue with that. You closed it down for 10 years. I would expect that. But think about what they're saying. The biomass that they're claiming are species of non-concern to the fisheries management. If you shut it down, sure, there's going to be more fish, but they're not species that we were having a problem with. So did our fisheries management already take care of those problems? The spillover effect that they're claiming is about lobster, spiny lobster. Well, the spiny lobster isn't a species of concern anyway because we manage those too. Regulations, report cards, all of that. Our catch, commercial and rec. But what they did prove was, guess what? If you close it down, they're going to keep breeding. And probably they're breeding and killing out because they're overpopulated and we're going to take the effect of them spilling out. They're cockroaches of the ocean, for God's sake. What did they do? They're coming out to go eat. They're going to survive. So then, okay, we're going to take that. But what we're saying is this, for the areas that are closed in the central and northern California that haven't proven there's a big difference between inside and outside the MPA, let's prove the science. As a scientist, you need to have a theory, you have to have certain expectations, you need measurable objectives. What are those? Because they are just taking claim to increase biodiversity spillover, but they never had clear objectives of what they expected. If you want to measure something, if you want to prove it, you put a report card together of objectives. And then you can claim yes, maybe, or no. And then you can actually take true adaptive management efforts either way, right? Claim it, prove it. What we claimed and said to them was this. If you really want to prove your MPA necessity for access restriction, take one of those areas that doesn't show a lot of inside-outside pressure and reopen it for the next test. If it doesn't show any difference, then you can't prove the necessity in those areas for restricted access. Prove it the other way, because that's the science experiment. So those are the types of things that we're working on, guys. We're not the enemy. We love conservation. We want the future for our sport. We want to make sure that we're at the table talking about the real issues that can help solve the issues of our whole coastline. That's what we're doing. Now, what we want to do, and this is scary to me, is we want to open this up to questions of you. You're the anglers. This is what we do it for. Michael's going to, and I'm going to stand up here and answer the questions. If you guys can line up down here, because we're on courts here, it's kind of short. But if you guys can line up and ask the questions, we'll try to do it. Now, a little rule of engagement. We're not going to attack anybody. We're not pointing a finger. Don't be mean. Ask honest questions that we can answer. Is that fair? Okay, let's try this.
Kevin Nakata.
Michael, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, man.
Good afternoon, Michael, and the Ocean Protection Council. My name is Kevin Nakata. I work in the fishing industry. I'm probably one of the younger guys that you're going to see in the industry and getting up there and trying to make a business out of this. So, aside from myself loving fishing, I'm affected by some of the decision making that you're part of, with being part of the council, and aside from other parts of the environment that we're in right now. Thank you for allowing the fishing community to speak to you directly. I would first like to comment with regards to the decision-making process and the implementation of the 30 by 30 initiative in the state of California. Like myself, many outdoorsmen are opposing the 30 by 30 initiative. The implementation excludes participation with wildlife and greater education with the natural world. On top of the loss in our inability to interact with the environment, we've also been excluded from the process that's been put in place in our government to allow for fair decision making. The governor implementing 30 by 30 in the state of California through the executive order N8220 is proof that outdoorsmen are being alienated in political decisions within the state. I would encourage all my peers and this body in the state of California to make better decisions on behalf of the outdoorsmen and not seeing the community and see them as a community to provide greater involvement. My question to you today is how 30 by 30 and the MLPA initiative is not bound by the state constitutional rights of state residents. My primary example when correlating the conflict between 30 by 30 and the state is the constitutional article 1, section 25. Are you familiar?
I have to say that I'm not.
Okay, I'm gonna read it to you. This is from the state constitution. Section 25, the people have the right to fish upon and from the public lands of the state and in the waters thereof, excepting upon lands set aside for fish hatcheries, and no land owned by the state shall ever be sold or transferred without reserving in the people the absolute right to fish thereupon. And no law shall ever be passed making it a crime for the people to enter upon the public lands within the state for the purpose of fishing in any water containing fish that have been planted therein by the state, provided that the legislature may by statute provide for the season when and the conditions under which the different species of fish may be taken. So you want me to repeat my question?
So your question is how do we reconcile 30 by 30 and sort of MPAs more generally with that provision?
Correct.
Is your question?
With
yeah.
not provision, the state constitutional
the language
article.
in the Constitution. Yeah. That's a really good question, and I have to say that's not my area of expertise. I'm sort of more as a science staffer on the implementation side. I will say the Marine Life Protection Act, which sort of mandated the creation of MPAs, was passed in 1999, and I'm sure there's been legal discussion about what you bring up. I think it's a really good point. I'm going to ask about it. I think maybe to address your broader concern about how the 30 by 30 initiative and MPAs kind of go together, I'm hoping that my message is getting out there that we're not looking at more MPAs as the only way to meet 30 by 30. And that's because of the concerns that you raised in the sort of preamble to your question about access, about being part of the process, right? And about being able to bring that fisherman's perspective of conservation to the table, right? So I can't answer your constitutional question. I wish I could, but I'm sure there's a lawyer I know who could. But in terms of where we go moving forward, right? The governor's executive order set the goal, and now the Resources Agency, and OPC specifically for coastal waters, is in charge of implementing it. So I'm most concerned with how do we implement it? We have to do it. That's our job. That's dictated in the executive order. How do we do it in a way that's smart, that's common sense, that includes a bunch of different perspectives? It's a compromise approach. That's what I'm most focused on. So I hope that at least got a little bit towards your question.
Hi, Michael. Since the current MLPAs, which represent about 60% of the waters, are in the prime fishing areas, the concern in the fishing community, especially those that have a business connected with that, is that the 16% MPAs are in prime fishing waters, and doesn't that represent more than a 16% inaccessibility in real terms? Meaning not all waters are equally productive from a fishery business standpoint, and doesn't an increase of 14% on top of the existing 16% MLPAs represent an even larger number or percentage of the truly fishable waters? And at that point, the angling community is concerned about it tipping over into viability of a business operation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I hadn't ever really thought of it in exactly that way, like not just absolute area of waters, but area of fishable waters. Big difference between the waters out here, right, in San Diego versus waters in Del Norte County, right? I think that's a really fair question for the MPA adaptive management process, right? So, like I was saying, if there are those tweaks that are proposed, they have to be based in science, but then there has to be a process for public input, right? So let's go back to that boundary shifting example. So if the science says, hey, these MPAs are too far apart, we suggest that you move the boundary north or south of the moon, right? And the community feels, hey, that's a real impact in terms of the viability of our business, right? What you're missing just by looking at the ecological connection is really important habitat, really important fishable area. There's room to have that conversation and to have that compromise, right? So again, in that particular MPA management approach, pathway for 30 by 30, there can be that conversation. I don't think it's going to be as relevant for the stuff that we're doing on conservation that's not directly impacting fishery. Does that help?
So to put this into perspective so that you guys get some clarity, that 16% of MPAs in our state, 124 MPAs we have, that 16% is respective of 50% of the good fishable waters along our coastline. So if you go and said that they're going to double the MPA effort with the current practice, that would be 100%. In other words, everybody who lives down here knows we lost La Jolla. That means that Point Loma would be on the block, because that's the other 50%, right, in this local area. You kind of get the whole message, right? But that's why we fight. Is it all necessary, and why did you only claim the best, the top of the food chain in the fishable waters, the best habitat? You didn't grab all the sandy bottom and all those other areas. You grabbed all of our most productive areas and then close it off, right? The 9% is closed off to fishing access, and others have restrictions. They're all at different levels. But that's why we are so important to keep an eye on this process, to make sure that we hold them accountable to their science experiment and the results.
All right, next one, you guys, sir.
Hey, Mike and Wayne. I just want to talk some about our sardine fishery. I don't think the general public knows how close we came to losing that fishery. And a lot of the data that was recorded and stuff like that, they wanted to stay outside and get sardine numbers in water that the biomass wasn't there. The biomass was on the beach. So we're collecting data and all this stuff, and it's inaccurate data because they don't want to go tight to the beach. So can you guys talk a little bit about how we can influence and get them to go tighter to the beach so we can save our fishery, our sardine fishery, because that's our livelihood, is the sardine fishery.
I can take this one.
Okay, so let me help out there, because this isn't necessarily a 30 by 30 issue. This has to do with our Pacific Fisheries Management Council and what we do at the federal level. And what happens is the sardine, the anchovy, the squid is managed at the federal level. And so the NOAA fishery scientists were only surveying in the federal waters. In other words, 3 miles to 200. All the fish have been up on the beach and in our bays the last few years. So what happened was they were missing a piece of the puzzle. We worked really hard along with all of our partners to make sure that they understood what was going on and the piece that was missing. So we brought in our wet fish producers, we brought in Effingham Brothers, we brought in the pilots, and had to prove to them why they were missing such a big piece and what a fallacy to their fisheries management plan and models they were incurring. That is why we were able to say what we did. But that has nothing to do with this. But here's the rub. If they increase the MPAs and don't take MPAs, and those fish are sitting within those areas, it doesn't matter. None of us can touch them. So that is a concern to all of us, because the fish move. We go through these periods and cycles between the anchovies, the squid, and the sardines, and we're in one of those ships right now, right? As that happens, what's going to happen to us, our fishery? We don't remove anything from the ecosystem. We reuse it and release it. So our fish aren't being taken and exported out of the system. We're not depleting them. We're using them. In a way, we're recycling them. So it's a little bit different mindset of how we go through our process versus others, and why we're so important in watching this. So that's kind of the answer to your question.
One quick point, actually 2 really quick points, because I think there are good issues that you raised. First of all, I think there's been some concern that is OPC or the Resources Agency kind of taking over fisheries management responsibilities from the California Fish and Game Commission or from the Pacific Fisheries Management Council. That's not the case, right? Those institutions are charged with fisheries management. We do ocean policy. That's not our job. We're working together, but we're not fisheries managers. Second point you make, that the conclusions that we draw for our management are only as good as the data that we collect. I could not agree more. So this goes towards any restoration work that we do, definitely goes to MPA management. Let's make sure we're getting our, and Wayne and I were just talking about this, you gotta get your question right, and then you gotta design your science to answer that question. And your question has to give you some kind of red light, yellow light, green light, or whatever, some indication of a course of action to take. So we got to design good science if we want to have good management. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming. Does 30 by 30 mean more areas close to fishing?
That's the question of the day. I'm not gonna lie, it could, but it's going. The NPA adaptive management process could result in more area close to fishing because tweaks to the NPAs are on the table. So stricter regulations are on the table, right? That being said, that's not, I think as you were getting from my comments earlier, that's not our top priority. Closing off more areas to fishing is not our top priority.
But it could happen.
But it could happen, right? Recreational, maybe with the NPA adaptive management process. Commercial, I mean, there are things I think maybe we can all agree on in terms of, I had a conversation recently about set gill nets that are being used in the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. I'm pretty new to that conversation, but that seems like something maybe we could all agree we should change that. So I can't say no, I can't promise no to your question, but I hope you're hearing that we're focused on all of the threats to biodiversity, and we're not solely focused on fishing. Because in many cases, I don't see fishing as a threat to biodiversity. So, thank you.
Okay, I'm not in the industry, just your average person who likes to fish. I had a boat, I don't now, but when I did, I used to like to go out for a couple of years and catch lobsters. And there was limits and all that. Next thing you know, you have to fill in a form saying where you're going to go, and then once you get there, you have to say, okay, well, did I catch any in this area, and were they short or were they keepers? And did you not catch any in this area? And you've given them all this data, and the next thing, logical step is they're going to say, well, you caught a bunch there, so we better close that. And then the other side of it is, well, those were short, you didn't catch any over here, better close that too. So it seems to me that, I mean, besides it being inconvenient, it's hard to write on this paper that they give you because and especially when it's wet, it was just ridiculous. And that's not my whole question. 30 by 30, does that mean that they want to close down the 30% of the fishing areas by 2030? Is that what that means?
No.
Okay, so my other question is, how do we reverse this MLPA nonsense, and how is it that the governor can just say, well, we're going to do this without any input from the public, and especially with what he was talking about, I look at the state constitution, and they're illegally closing our fishing areas.
All right, well, thanks, man, for your question. Some of that's way above my pay grade, I have to be honest. We're not fisheries managers, and based on the comments that we heard at the Fish and Game Commission, I don't think anybody wants to go back to square one on the MLPA process, right? Square zero, fair enough. But the question is, what do we do going forward, right? The executive order happened, now we're charged with implementing it, and again, I'm repeating myself now, but the question is, how do we do that in a way that makes sense? So.
All right, let me see if I can put a little perspective into it. Lobster report cards is through the CBFW, Department of Fish and Wildlife. Lobster regulations are done through our Fish and Game Commission process. We do need that information because that is what feeds our fisheries management actions. I know it's painful. We do not trust. We do not like the surveyors, the surf samplers from the department at the ramps in our boats, but it's necessary, and here's why. And I was against it all in my years too. We thought that was all being used against us, but here's the problem. If we do not get good sampling, the little bit of sampling that they do have has to be extrapolated to the whole. So when we don't turn in 50% of our report cards, me personally, I assume those are people that didn't catch the damn things, that's why they're not reporting them. But what happens? They have to take the 50% that did report and total that to the whole. So it can either help us or it can hurt us. So be very careful on how you participate in what we do. That's the one part. The other part was
It's
constitutionality. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this state. What happened is we won AB 3030 in the legislature. We beat it down. That was a statute, right? But what the executive order is the governor putting down a guideline to his agencies of what he wants as a goal for them to meet. It's like anybody else going to work and having your boss telling you what to do. So right now, they're in implementation because gosh knows who's going to tell your boss no. Understand that. But as an executive order, it can always be overturned by the next governor. That's why votes matter, right? Yes, it's in play right now, but what is CCA doing? We're making sure that there's no further legislation to make this legit. We have beat back all of the legislation they've tried to put in place to legitimize this process. That's important. So what we can do is what we can do. Right now, we're going to work with this process, and we're going to try to still go towards conservation efforts, but limit the access issue, right? That's our biggest beef, is that we don't want any more additional restricted access. We believe in the clean water, habitat, biodiversity. So let's focus our efforts in those efforts that we can push forward for the good of all of us. Because we all believe that it's one ocean and we're stewards of our resources. So there shouldn't be a question in there, okay?
And just one thing in response to that. So I think, in terms of AB 3030 and the legislation, yeah, that failed. And this new 30 by 30 process is driven by executive order, right? You might not like the idea of 30 by 30. You might not think it's necessary, especially in the ocean with good fisheries management. But I think if you go and you read that Pathways to 30 by 30 document, I really think there's very little in there that folks would truly disagree with. Some of it's really broad, and you're like, oh, this leaves like a lot of things open to interpretation. But in terms of saying, let's empower local communities, let's focus on the conservation work. Yes, we got to put numbers on the map, points on the board to get to 30, but let's focus on the conservation work. I really do feel like that creates a lot of common ground for compromise. It is legitimate in that way. We just have to make sure the process makes room for everybody to be at those tables.
So we only have a few minutes, but I want to ask the elephant in the room, which I haven't heard the question yet. We have this 30 by 30 movement. It started on the international front. California actually qualified before anybody else in North America for the green standard. The Fed side picked it up. It's called the America the Beautiful Act, and California actually already meets that standard. The question in the room will always be, why does California standard have to be so much higher than everybody else and extreme on its effort for the same movement? Why can't we just say, we're there, we've been there, we've been doing it all along, and we've already met the standard? That's the elephant in the room for us.
Okay, and that's a fair elephant and a fair question. So I'm going to answer it like this. I don't think 30 by 30, as we've defined it, is actually all that unreasonable compared to what we're seeing in the rest of the world. If I were standing up here and saying, we want twice as many MPAs, as a scientist, I think that would be unreasonable. I don't think that's justified by the science. But saying, hey, more conservation is always a good thing. Saying, let's make our MPA network the best it can be. Let's do that based on science, right? And let's look at these other opportunities that are going to support local communities, going to support tribes, going to finally give us a better scientific evaluation of what biodiversity benefits all these other kinds of areas and state waters have. I don't think that is an unreasonable bar to meet.
So what we say is this. We have the most restricted fishing practices in the country, if not in the nation, that take care of all the biodiversity, the habitat, the ecosystem, the water quality. And we believe that we already meet the 30%, if not 100% of the status. We have MPAs, we have national sanctuaries, we have state parks, we have all these areas, we have essential fish habitats out there which are federally protected. The coast is already under all of these extremes. How much more do you have to keep doing before you claim success? And how do you prove that success over time? How can you claim it without the protections in place of pollution? This is the rub that we have with the conservation efforts. Let's fix it all. Let's get to the end game now and quit messing around with who should have access and who shouldn't because of whatever agreement or opinion you may have. This is where we are at, right? Give us the access we're deemed necessary. Let's work on the pollution issue so we can fix it all. Do we have another question?
So 1 minute, Wayne. Huh? 1 minute.
Got it. As you heard, quite a few people have expressed socioeconomic concerns with implementation of the 30 by 30 plan. So I'd like to know if the 30 by 30 program is subject to the environmental impact review process under CCA.
So as far as I know, 30 by 30 itself, well, I definitely can say this. 30 by 30 as a policy is not subject to CCA. But if there were certain actions that we were taking under the 30 by 30 umbrella, like building a living shoreline or something like that to buffer for sea level rise, just an example that comes to mind, that could be subject to CCA. So policies, not so much, but actions, yes.
Hey everybody, the time went quick. We answered a lot of questions. Let's give a hand to Mike for coming out here and standing on this stage.
Thank you.
I mean,
Thank you, Wayne.
you know he was nervous, right? Well, we're going to fix up that. But hey, thank you guys for the good questions. Hopefully we answered some. Hopefully you inspired more. If you have more questions, bring them to the CCA booth. We're right down there on the aisle. Guys, we're here to help you to protect our rights to access and conservation. That's what we do for a living. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.